quality content. He has spoken on topics at state, national, and level. He has authored 3 books and translated 1 book. Today, he will deliver a talk on Chhatrapati model of Central University of Karnataka. And I would also like to introduce you to the audience. In audience today, we have many faculty members from various departments.
Shivamji, your voice is not clear. Shivamji, you are not audible
Am I
properly.
clear?
Yeah, now it is clear.
Okay, is it clear?
No, it's breaking in between.
Okay. So I think without any further delay, I request Shri Ali
Shivam sir, you can do video so that voice will be clear.
Okay, is it better now?
No, when you are saying it is better, but remaining part it is not better.
Okay.
Shivam sir, now you try.
Inconvenience.
You will get.
Okay. So, sir, I was just introducing our audience also to you. So we have mainly faculty members from various departments of Central University of Karnataka, and we are also fortunate to have today Shri Krishna Joshi ji, the Karakata Pramukh. So with this now, I request you to take over and please enlighten us with your word wisdom and valuable experience. So over to you, sir.
Shivamji, before that you introduced Krishna Joshi ji is there.
Oh, I think I mentioned it, but I'll mention again. We also have today among us, say, Krishna Joshi ji, who's Uttar Karyakarta Prant Bodhik Pramukh. So we are very fortunate to have him, and we welcome him also among us. With this, sir, Sudhakar sir, now I request you to take over and deliver your talk.
Okay. Thank you so much, Shivam Mishra ji, and my good friend Satyamurthy, Lingamurthy ji, and other bandhus with whom I am getting introduced today, and also to the Pranta Bodhik Pramukh ji also. It's a great pleasure to be with you, and then to be able to say a few words about a personality who has largely been understudied in India. He has been confined to Maharashtra, but then he's a national figure, and the impact of his rule spans to the whole country. So I would basically try to focus on Shivaji's life, his achievements, and also on the administrative part of his life, how he governed this country, the part of the country that was under his control. So thank you very much for this opportunity at the outset. And let me now actually begin. I would like to speak for about 30 minutes so that we can have an interactive session later, so that we can all share our opinions and then discuss and then bring to light newer things. Thank you so much. Dear friends, Shivaji, by any standards, by any international standards, must be counted among one of the greatest warriors of all time. The history that we read, we always talk about 2 or 3 warriors. For instance, one is Julius Caesar, second is Alexander the Great, and the third is Napoleon. Reams and volumes have been written about them. They have been considered as some of the greatest warriors that the world history has seen. Shivaji, if you want to posit Shivaji, you would find that he is far better than, he is superior to all these 3 so-called greats. Alexander Great was a world, conqueror. The world that he knew at that point in time, he conquered the whole area. But when he came to India, he faced opposition. At the first opposition that he faced, his army wilted. He could not motivate them to further fight. After they fought Purushottama or Porus, King Porus, They were so exhausted and they realized that Porus was after all a very small king, and it took us such a long war, battle, and then such huge an effort to overpower a small king. So what about the Nandas? What about the other Magadha kings and others? So the army has lost its will to fight. No amount of motivation from Alexander could bring them back onto the battlefield. A dejected, disappointed Alexander had to return, and while returning, he passed away. That we all know. Alexandria is the place where he passed away. But then the world conqueror, someone who's suffixed with the word great, Alexander the Great, he was defeated. And he could not, one defeat was enough to demotivate all his soldiers. Compare it with Chhatrapati Shivaji. Chhatrapati Shivaji fought over 250 battles all his life. Some of them have been won, some of them have been lost. A lot of them have been lost for several months. Shivaji had to be on the run. Yet none of his soldiers were demotivated. None of his soldiers tried to defect or desert or quit the war. Just one single comparison. There's another example that I can give you. The Julius Caesar's example. Julius Caesar was considered a world conqueror in his time. But what happened to Julius Caesar? The moment the soldiers and his friends and allies started seeing him, gradually change from a conqueror to a king. Julius Caesar wanted personal glory. He wanted name and fame and all the credit for himself. So his own friends assassinated him. We all know that his best friend Brutus has killed him. So the moment you start thinking of your own self, your own benefit, your own aggrandizement, you are killed by your own associates. There will be opposition from within. Your own associates, your own friends and accomplices will turn against you. Compare it with, just 1 minute, let me switch off this.
When actually Chhatrapati Shivaji had fought over 250 wars, he had fought for a period of about 30-35 years. His first victory was at the age of 14, and then he fought till he was 53. So for nearly 40 years, Shivaji fought battles, but not one of his associate or accomplice deserted him, tried to assassinate him, tried to overpower him, or tried to replace him. In fact, his followers were ready to sacrifice their lives for Chhatrapati Shivaji. The famous example of Tanaji Malsure or Baji Prabhu Deshpande is right before us. So this way, Caesar was assassinated by his own men, whereas Chhatrapati Shivaji was supported to the hilt. People were ready to sacrifice their life for Chhatrapati Shivaji. Not just that. After Shivaji was gone, in 1680, he passes away at the age of 53. After Shivaji passes away, his armies fight for 27 years against an adversary who's considered all-powerful, Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb had huge army, lot of resources at his command. He had to fight every inch of the way. For 27 years, he fought against the Mughals and had to return disappointed. He could not win the Marathas. He could not defeat the Maratha spirit. He could not subdue the Maratha, motivation levels. At the end of his life, after 27 years, Aurangzeb passes away and he dies in south. He has come to subdue and kill and then overpower the Maratha kingdom. But then he ends up dying here in Aurangabad. The third renowned world warrior that I'm talking about is Napoleon. Napoleon is a world beater. Napoleon has fought many wars and he had won many of them. He is known for strategy. He is known for tactics. But then his own followers, when he actually gets defeated in a war, his own followers say that we are not ready to die for you. You go and please surrender. That's how he gets arrested and he's sent to the Alba island, where island Alba, where he spends the rest of his life. Compare that with Chhatrapati Shivaji. After Shivaji was gone, there was no king for the Marathas. There was no kingdom for the Marathas because Raigad was occupied. Everywhere the Mughals were trampling the Shivaji's kingdom. Thirdly, there was no king worth the name. There is no army worth the name. There was no finances worth the name. But Chhatrapati Shivaji's band of loyal Marathas fought for 27 years. They were thrown away from Raigad. They were sent away from Raigad. They fought from Jinji in Tamil Nadu. So this is what distinguishes Shivaji from the other world conquerors. Shivaji, despite defeats, was not abandoned by his friends. His friends were ready, his friends and associates were ready to die for Chhatrapati Shivaji, sacrifice their lives for Chhatrapati Shivaji. There is this famous dialogue of Baji Prabhu Deshpande, where he says, Shivaji doesn't want him to die. Baji Prabhu Deshpande wants to stop the enemy forces at a narrow pass called Pavan Khind. He's outnumbered. The enemies are huge in number. But still he says, he asks Shivaji to go to safe place, and then after he goes to the safe place, he has to blow a conch so that he knows that Shivaji is safe. Shivaji says, why do you sacrifice your life? Let us both fight together at Pavan Khind and try to kill as many enemies as possible and die in the process. But Baji Prabhu says, one Baji goes, another Baji can come. If one Shivaji goes, the whole dream of Swarajya will vanish. So such kind of loyal band of followers Shivaji had. So if one peruses through the world history, you would find that there is Shivaji is incomparable, loyal band of followers, trusted assistants and lieutenants, and then a very highly motivated army that fought for 27 years without a leader, without a Rajya, without a salary. Can anyone imagine a band of army fighting for 27 years without a fixed salary? Shivaji's army did this. So that is where we have to compare. That is how we have to posit Shivaji. We have to situate Shivaji in the world history. There is no comparison to Shivaji. So this is, and second thing that we need to understand is Shivaji happened to Indian history at a very interesting point. This is something that Shivaji is actually the continuation of the independence struggle that our Rajas, our kings, our warriors were waging against the invading forces. He was part of a long chain. For instance, 2094 was the time when the one of the strongest Hindu kingdom was subdued. It was the Yadava kingdom of Devgiri in Maharashtra. You know what happened? Yadavas were all powerful, but they lacked planning and intelligence. Alauddin Khilji had sent his general to invade Devgiri, and the armies of Devgiri were not aware. The king of Devgiri was not aware that Alauddin Khilji's armies are actually, coming to, attack his fort. So he goes and hides in his Devgiri fort. Those who have watched Devgiri fort will watch that this is one of the most powerful defensive fort ever found in this country. It's very difficult to defeat. But how was he defeated? He was defeated because there were few people there. And when they went and saw, they used to have huge water resources. All those water resources were dried and no arrangements were made to fill them up again. And they had a huge granary which can last for 6 months. When they opened, they found that instead of rice, there was salt in it. No army can survive just on salt. So despite being, seated in one of the most powerful defensive forts, within 3 days, the Yadava army had to surrender. It was plundered, pillaged. The Yadava kingdom was lost for good. That was in 1294. After that, the second biggest Hindu empire in South India was the Kakatiya Empire, whose borders started from Srikakulam in Andhra Pradesh, and the northern tip of undivided Andhra Pradesh, and went up to Bidar. Their eastern borders were till Motupalli, which is a seaport in the coastal Andhra, and then they extended up to Nanded, Parbhani. Such a huge kingdom. But this kingdom too was lost because of improper planning. The invaders had attacked them twice. Both times Prataparudra repelled them. After repelling them for a second time, he distributes all the food in the granaries among the people as the spoils of victory. He said, you enjoy, take away whatever you want. Every grain of rice was taken away. All the soldiers were given leave so that they can go and do their agricultural works. Within no time, the enemy was at the gates. Before he could actually marshal and mobilize his forces and get enough food grains, he was defeated. So total unpreparedness, total lack of planning, total lack of vision was the reason why 1310. So the difference between these two is around say 20-25 years. 1294 was when Devgiri fell, 1310 was when Warangal fell, and then the breakaway factions of the Kakatiyas went down to the Vijayanagara and established the Vijayanagara kingdom, the Hakka and Bukka that we talk about. The Vijayanagara kingdom lasted for over 200 years, but then in the Tallikota war, they were killed. That was 1567. Aliya Ramaraya was defeated by the combined forces of all the Muslim kings down south. The Adil Shahis, the Bijapurs, the Nizam Shahis, so on and so forth. It was after the defeat of Vijayanagaram that there was the Hindu kingdoms have completely vanished in the South India. Barely 60 years after that, Chhatrapati Shivaji was born. During this time, the Paligars of Vijayanagaram, hundreds of Paligars of Vijayanagaram were waging a battle against the Mughals, the Adil Shahis, the Nizam Shahis, the Osman Shahis, and they were holding the banner of freedom aloft. At the same time, the Maratha Sardars started dawning on the stage, and one of the most powerful Maratha Sardar was Shahaji Bhonsle. Shivaji was Shahaji Bhonsle's son. He was born in 1623. He was born 1623. So that's how Shivaji comes at a very crucial stage of Indian history. We need to understand that the South India's battle against the invaders of two kinds, the local variety as well as those who have come from Afghanistan, Persia, which is today's Iran, Arabia, and Central Asia. These two streams of invaders were opposed tooth and nail by the Yadava kings, by the Kakatiya kings, by the Vijayanagara kings, and also by the Paligars. Shivaji comes at this juncture to Indian history, and he combines the lessons that India had to learn. We had to learn all these lessons. He had understood these lessons and he had tried to implement. I would try to give a brief account of how Shivaji was different from all other leaders. Of course, Shivaji had very vivid memories of Vijayanagara's glory, because Shahaji knew about those things, and Shahaji and Jijamata have transferred the knowledge of the glory of Vijayanagara kingdom to Chhatrapati Shivaji. Chhatrapati Shivaji's first lesson was to ensure that the forts, every fort that he built or every fort that he had occupied, taken over from the Bijapurs or the Mughals or from the Siddhis. Siddhis, you must all be knowing, are the people of Abyssinian African descent who have come and occupied some ports in India's coast, western coast particularly. So every fort that he occupied, either occupied or constructed, he ensured that there are two gates. One escape route was a must. Unlike the Yadava fort of Devgiri, which had only one entry point and exit point, if the entry and exit point was blocked, the people inside were, as good as captured. So Shivaji ensured that there is an escape route, there is a second route. The second thing that Shivaji did was to ensure that one fort is supported by a nearby fort. He had always looked at forts in couples. He said, if A is a fort, B is its partner. So if fort number A is in trouble, the fort, the army that is stationed in the fort B will come to their rescue. And if B is attacked, A will come to their rescue. So this is how he has ensured that there are two forts rather, and each one supplementing the other. And the second, he had also brought the concept of Giridurga, Vanadurga, Jaladurga, and Maidana Durga, Sthala Durga. That means the forts also, instead of being stationed in just in some elevated place, he identified forts and constructed. He identified hillocks and steep ravines and then constructed the forts over there. That's the second thing that he has done. The third thing, he ensured that water supply and food supply was aplenty in the fort. And the fourth interesting thing that he did was, no fort of Chhatrapati Shivaji had a place for Mauj Masti. No dancers, no concubines, no cultural activities. Station. So there was never a question of Shivaji's army enjoying a good dance or waiting for some danceries to come and then perform before them. So there was not a single moment of recklessness or neglect. The fifth important thing he did was, he did not construct any temple inside the fort. It was later rulers who had built masjids or other temples or what. Shivaji did never constructed a temple in a fort, because he wanted to ensure that in case of a fort being handed over to the enemy, the first thing he would do is to break the idol, damage the temple. It would have a huge sentimental and psychological impact on the army. So Shivaji ensured that there are no temples in the 300 odd forts that he had ruled. This is a very interesting thing, because the modern armies, even the modern armies today, have their own chaplains, the church pastors. The Britishers always had church pastors along with them. And then Indian army also has different prayer houses for different religions. Though it is called Sarva Dharma Sthal, there are temples for Hindus, there is a Gurdwara for the Sikhs, there is a church, there is a masjid, all in one place in the army. But Shivaji was more secular, in the sense that he did not allow even a single temple to be constructed in the fort, because he did not want to suffer the sentimental hurt when a temple was attacked. So it was a garrison. It was a place where he can, keep his forces. It was a place from where his forces can launch an assault, but never a temple. The prayers were individual. Such was the planning of Chhatrapati Shivaji. So Shivaji's forts were, they were never under the control of one individual. This is the sixth and the most important, reform that he had brought. Till then, there used to be a Jagirdar or a Shiledar or a Kiledar, who was actually the head of the fort, and he was the one who decided everything. Chhatrapati Shivaji ensured that the administration of the fort was in the hands of 4 different people. One was manning the army, one was maintaining the management, one was managing the affairs inside the fort, one was a Patra Lekhak and a particular record keeper, Nabis he was called, and there was one who was taking care of the overall repairs and all those things. So there were 4 people responsible for individual forts, every single fort. Thus it was a collective, it was a group of leadership. So this is a concept that we are now trying to implement. For instance, we are talking about theater commands these days, and we are talking about tri-services commands these days. Andaman Nicobar, for instance, is a tri-service command where the Navy is present, Air Force is present, and the Army is present. They would be collectively headed by one single officer. This is tri-service command. Same way we now have theater commands. For instance, the Western Theater that abuts the Pakistan. We have a unified theater command where there is one leader and there is a group of collective leaders. The idea that Shivaji had implemented way back in the 16th century is now being implemented in India and elsewhere in the world. That is his military genius. This is something that as researchers, as faculty members, we must actually probe into these things, how Shivaji manned his forts, how he administered them, how he made collective leadership function effectively, even in the case, in the face of the toughest enemy. This, and the last thing that Shivaji did was he had never gifted Jagirs to anyone. He abolished the Jagirdari system. It's a revolutionary concept in the 16th century. Till then, the Indian forces, kings, the Hindu kings or the Mughal kings or the Bijapur, everyone, they used to have a central authority, and they used to have their own plenipotentiaries, or they used to have their samantas, they used to have their suzerains, who was leader of 10 villages, 15 villages, 30 villages, as they, depending on the position they have in the darbar. So this man was functioning as an independent unit, and when there is a war, he used to send his armies and he used to accompany, but otherwise he was an independent suzerain. He was administering his own 10, 20 villages. He had his own set of rules. Chhatrapati Shivaji said, the rule will be of the Swarajya. Individual forts or Jagirs are not going to be there. However valorous an army soldier may have fought, he would be given cash incentives, but never would he be given land. This is a very revolutionary reform that he had brought in. So everything was centralized. The ruling was decentralized, but there was no possibility of regional satraps emerging. Shivaji ensured that there were no regional challengers. There were no regional independent groups who can trade with the Bijapurs if they want, who can trade with, who can set conditions to Shivaji and say that if you give me this much money, I will fight for you. Otherwise, I will go to the Bijapur side. So this was not possible because there was no Jagirdari. A very revolutionary concept. Jagirdari abolition was what government of India did immediately after independence. So for us, it took nearly 400 years to implement what Shivaji implemented. He created a modern army force. This is where Shivaji is different. So if you look at Shivaji's life, he lived for just 53 years. He was born in 1623 in Shivneri Fort. And then at the age of 14, he captured the first fort, the Torana Fort. These are all available in our textbooks, so I'm not really going into textbooks or on the internet or on the several books that have been written on Chhatrapati Shivaji. So I'm actually skipping some details because in the hope that we all can actually access this information from various sources, libraries, internet, so on and so forth. So he captured Torana at the age of 14. He became a king at the age of, he became Chhatrapati, a Raja or a king, head of a kingdom in 1674. He passed away in 1680. So in this span, if you look at this span, 53 years, the first 10 years are gone. First 14 years are gone. He was adolescent, he was child, he was actually preparing himself. And then the last 2 years, Shivaji was unwell. So if you remove these 16 years from his 53 years life, maybe for 40 years, he lived an active life. In these 40 years, come to think of it, he fought 250 wars directly. 250 wars in a span of 40 years. That is nearly 5 to 6 wars in a year. He was fighting 5 to 6 wars in a year. And for how long Shivaji did rule Maratha kingdom or the Swarajya, as he never called it Maharashtra. He used to call Maharashtra Dharma. He used to call Swarajya. He used to call his own Rajya as Hindavi Swaraj. How long did he rule the Hindavi Swaraj? It was for a small period of 7 years. Of the 7 years, the last 2 years, he was unwell. He was unwell and confined to the Raigad and other forts, where he stationed himself and did not fight wars. So his whole life, he was a ruler for just 7 years, of which 2 years are inactive. So 5 years Shivaji has ruled. So what we are now going to discuss is, in these 5 years of actual rule, the kind of reforms that Shivaji has brought, the kind of changes that Shivaji has brought, what he could do. Roughly speaking, he has got just 5 years. Any politician in this country, if he gets power, it will be for 5 years. What Shivaji got was an effective period of 5 years. So he got what P.V. Narasimha Rao got. He got what Vajpayee got. Just 5 years. In 5 years, how he transformed the country, how he transformed his army, how he transformed his kingdom, how he redefined the principles of war, the principles of diplomacy, the principles of economy, running an economy, doing an agriculture, industries, trade practices. This is something, these 5 years of his life are very important, and every academician must do some sort of study on the systems that Shivaji had put in place in this short period of 5 years. 250 wars he fought, and 74 was when he was coronated, and it's only after the coronation that he had put his administration into place. And in 5 years, he had made the changes in the areas that he ruled that you would be surprised. Look at Chhatrapati Shivaji's administration. You will be surprised. Shivaji had thought of everything that a modern government thinks. He thought of environment. Shivaji thought of environments, environmental protection. He thought about the need to protect the environment. For instance, Shivaji was the first king in the modern world, modern history of this country, after Cholas and Cheras. Cheras are the kings in Kerala. After the Cholas and Cheras, Shivaji was the only king who thought of the seas, who thought of maritime security. He raised an army. He raised a navy. His navy chief was known as the Darya Sarang. And the first Darya Sarang was Kanhoji Angre. Kanhoji Angre today is recognized as the first admiral of India's history. Kanhoji Angre. There is a maritime museum in Bombay. If you ever get a chance to go to Bombay, please do visit this maritime museum, where the ships, boats, and gunboats that Shivaji had got assembled are there for all of us to see. Shivaji, prepared. Shivaji had manufactured boats, and then ships, and then steamers. Sorry, not steamers, but ships and boats for protecting the Indian Ocean as well as the Bay of Bengal. So for this, they needed jackfruit trees. So Shivaji had passed an order to take the consent of the owner of the jackfruit before felling it. Second thing, pay a compensation to him so that he doesn't lose his revenue. Third thing, the moment you cut one tree, you have to plant 10 jack trees and give the ownership to the man who's actually gifting you the jackfruit tree. Look at the way he protected environment. He said one should never cut jackfruit trees which are less than 20 years old. Only those which are beyond 20 years of age should be cut and made into a boat. This was a very small thing, but then Shivaji ensured that the trees were protected, the owners of the trees were financially benefited, and the reforestation activity was taken up. This was a rule decree that he had passed. Not many people know it. Let us think about the way he handled his finances. Trade, for instance. There is one instance where he writes a letter to the ruler of to the Jagirdar of the Sangameshwar. Sangameshwar was a place which was very close to Goa, today's Goa. And in this place, there was a huge market for salt. In those days, Maharashtra did not have salt. Only salt used to come only from the sea coast. So Sangameshwar was the place where the salt trade used to happen in the Shivaji's kingdom. He writes a letter to the chief of that area, the chief administrator of the area, and he says, look at his vision. He says, I have come to know that the people are preferring to go to Bardesh, another place which is nearby. They're going to Bardesh to buy salt because the salt is cheaper over there. The salt in Sangameshwar, our Swadesh, is costlier because you are levying more taxes. You are collecting more taxes from the people. So the people want, those who want salt, they're going to the Bardesh. Bardesh is nothing but Goa of today, which is under the control of the Portuguese. He said, why should our people go and buy salt from the Bardesh, which is part of the Portuguese kingdom? Why should our revenues go to Portuguese? So you should take care that the taxes are brought down so that our people prefer our salt, our trade improves, our money stays with us. This is Shivaji's thinking. And this was a written decree. Shivaji personally wrote this letter to the chief administrator of the Sangameshwar area, asking him to reduce the taxes on the salt so that there is no trade imbalance as far as the Swarajya is concerned. This is such a revolutionary idea. Even now we are talking about trade barriers, tariff barriers, so on and so forth. And Shivaji thought of these things, and Shivaji wanted the local traders to prosper. He wanted the local salt traders to prosper rather than someone who is in the other Rajya under occupation, particularly the Portuguese occupation. This is the second thing. And he was for prudence and transparency in economic practices. There is one letter of Chhatrapati Shivaji which is mentioned in his Bakars. Bakars are accounts of Shivaji's rule. Maharashtrians had this tradition of writing Bakars. Bakar is nothing but it's a Hindi word Bakhan. Bakhan is praising. Kisi ka bakhan karna, yani praise karna. So they wrote these books called Bakars where the actions, the decisions, and the consequences of king's decisions were discussed, mentioned. They were reduced to writing, and they were kept as documents. Marathas had this very rich tradition of Bakars, and those interested in history can actually go and read those Bakars, and they will give you voluminous information about the Maratha rule. So the most important point that Shivaji did was he wanted total transparency in every financial transaction. Once administrator writes to Chhatrapati Shivaji asking for selling away an old horse which has become useless in a war, in the battlefield. Shivaji writes to him, sell it and deposit the money under such and such head. This is a letter which is available, and Shivaji tells him. And when Shivaji next time meets this man, administrator, he remembers that and reminds him what happened to the money that you got, how much money did you get, and how much money did you deposit, and where did you, under which head did you deposit that amount. So this was how Shivaji administration ran. There are a lot of lessons that present day administrators can learn from Chhatrapati Shivaji's rule. Today, we have a prime minister who very famously said that if I give 1 rupee from Delhi, only 15 rupees, 15 paise reaches the intended targeted population. The 85 paise will be lost in the transit. A prime minister, Rajiv Gandhi, is has said this. So we have a situation where the Prime Minister is admitting that there is a leakage of 85% in every rupee that I send for the welfare of the people. Come to think of it, Chhatrapati Shivaji had a foolproof system in place in those days. Look at his visionary ideas. I'll give you 2 or 3 more examples before I come to the end of my presentation. Chhatrapati Shivaji was a lover of technology. He loved technology, new technology. Wherever he went, he wanted to understand the geography of the area. He wanted to understand the technologies that are being used by the people over there. Shivaji's knowledge of geography is immense. He was an applied geographer. He studied the topography, he studied the cartography. He had maps prepared for every fort. This was something very unique, considering the fact that cartography had come to India only after the Britishers came. I have read an account where Kashmir Maharaja gives a part of his land on lease to the Britishers. And the Britishers, in return, they prepare a map of Jammu and Kashmir in those days and present it to the Maharaja. That was the first time when the Kashmiri Maharaja knew where his Rajyam was, where his kingdom lay, and what were its frontiers, and which was the last village. All these details were given in a map form, cartographic form by the Britishers. It was a present given to the Kashmiri king. Here Shivaji had maps prepared in the 16th century. He had maps prepared. So he was an applied geographer, and also he was a lover of new technologies. Chhatrapati Shivaji, when he was in captivity in Agra, his life was uncertain. He doesn't know when he would be poisoned, when Aurangzeb would ask him to be beheaded. But then Shivaji tried to understand the military strategies. He used to discuss about military, army, the weaponry that the Mughals have with the soldiers who were there to actually guard him. He was imprisoned in Agra. So during that period, he was talking to the military officials, to Raja Ram Singh, Raja Jai Singh, and trying to know about the technology. He tried to understand the British technology also. British technology. He was a lover of British technology. The Britishers once come to him and say that Chhatrapati, your Britishers had a very strange relationship with Chhatrapati. They come and they ask him, your coins, golden dough, they are very coarse, very rough, and then they're not aesthetically done. They look very, primitive. We have better technology of minting coins. We will mint coins for you. You just give us the contract. We will make coins for you and then circulate them in your kingdom. Chhatrapati Shivaji said, you give me the technology of making the coins, minting of the coins. I will not let out my sovereignty or my ability, my currency system, and sublease it to you. He said the Britishers did not agree to part with the technology they had. So Chhatrapati Shivaji preferred coarse, unrefined coins of his own to the coins of which are fine coins made by the Britishers. This is a very interesting thing. This has lessons for us when we are talking about Make in India, when we are talking about indigenization of technologies. There's one more interesting incident. Till Chhatrapati Shivaji came onto the scene, the ambar, or the explosive material, the बारूद as we call in Hindi, बारूद का संचालन करना और बारूद को हैंडल करने का काम जो था, यह मुसलमानों ने किया था. हर राजा के पास एक छोटा सा मुसलमानों का दल हुआ करता था जिसने बारूद का उपयोग करता था. जैसे गोलकोंडा के एक फोर्ट है, वहां एक बहुत बड़ा अंबर खाना है. This Ambar Khana was the place where all the explosive material, the gunpowder, so on and so forth, was stored. And there used to be an Ambardar who was distributing it and who was actually releasing the material depending on the need. Chhatrapati Shivaji, for the first ever time, decided that the usage of explosive materials should not be confined to just one section of the society. The usage should be diversified. More people must be included. more people must be brought into the purview of explosive handling, gunpowder handling. So he trained some Hindu soldiers and made them in charges of the amber or the explosive material. So that's how Shivaji has, for the first ever time, there were many occasions in India's history where the ambardars, or the people who use amber, defected at the last moment and then joined hands with the enemies. With Shivaji's new decision, this became a thing of past. The other kingdoms also slowly started picking up this. Shivaji's spy system is very interesting. This is something that we need to study. There were two kinds of spy systems that Shivaji had. One was, informal. One was organized. Shivaji had sent his people to different parts of his kingdoms that are, abut his kingdom, the Nizams, the Kannada kingdoms, and then the Tamil Nadu area, and then to the North India. And he had established small groups of Marathi speaking people in every part of the country. For instance, in Andhra, I am giving you the example of Andhra Pradesh. There is a community called Arekatika community in Andhra Pradesh, which is now regarded as a scheduled caste community. These people were sent by Shivaji to stay in places where the army routes are present. For example, those army routes were known as Dandu Bata. Dandu is Dandayatra. Dandayatra means conquering or a campaign, military campaign. Bata is road, Dandu Bata. So in all these Dandu Batas, the Arekatika community was stationed, and they were supposed to see what was happening all around them and tip off to the system that Shivaji has evolved. So Shivaji, though he was ruling the Maratha area, he had information about what was happening in Nizam, what was happening in Karnataka, what was happening in the Portuguese area, what was happening in other parts of the country, even North India. So he knew who was coming from where to attack me. A mistake that the Yadava kingdom did, Shivaji has never done. So today, the Arekatika community in Andhra Pradesh, they speak a Marathi at their home, a Marathi that is 400 years old. That is no longer current in Maharashtra itself. They speak a Marathi which is 400 years old. They speak the Marathi of Chhatrapati Shivaji's vintage. And they mingle with the society. For years, they were the eyes and ears of Chhatrapati's kingdom. The second system that he had established was to set up Hanuman Mandirs everywhere. Of course, this was not done by the Shivaji's army. It was done by Samartha Guru Ramdas. Samartha Ramdas has established nearly 1,000 Hanuman temples all across the country, starting from Agra, Delhi, and then down to Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. Of course, in Andhra Pradesh, there are two such places that I have come across. One is in a Karnataka border town called Narayanpet. Narayanpet in Telangana is on the border of Karnataka. There is a Ramadas Peeth over there. And the second one is in the Maharashtra Telangana border. It is in a place called Sarangpur in Nizamabad. It was established by Samartha Ramdas himself. These things had a Vyamshala for the youth to physically strengthen themselves. They used to have an Aradhana Mandali where the women can congregate and pray. There used to be Matha attached with this Hanuman temple so that sannyasis stay there. They keep visiting the areas. They keep getting information from various sources, from the bhaktas, from the devotees, so on and so forth. And they were sanctuaries for the spies who were coming from far and wide and staying there. So this system of over 1,000 Hanuman temple, come Vyayamshala, come Matha, that Samartha Ramdas has established has served Shivaji in very good state. When he ran away from Agra, from the imprisonment of Aurangzeb, these Hanuman temples were the ones which had actually helped him to find sanctuary, to spend nights. Shivaji donned the robes of a sannyasi and he started staying in all these places. He sent his son because that would be a very telltale giveaway. So son was sent separately and Shivaji went separately. When Shivaji was going all alone, it was difficult to identify him, difficult to track him because he used all these 1,000 odd Hanuman Mandirs that Samartha Ramdas had set up for him, and was serving as a parallel information service. For instance, though I do not want to discuss current day politics, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, when he was in Chief Minister in Gujarat, he had his own parallel system of information. When something happens, he used to talk to the people that he knew in that area, and he used to get the information faster than the government mechanism. When the government officers were reporting that 3 people, no, not 3 people died, it was 7 people who have died, and they are in so hospital, this hospital, this hospital. So the administration became very alert. This was told to me by a senior bureaucrat in a Gujarat government. He told me that Modi used to have advanced information, and he used to get information much faster from the ground. And before the officials went with their reports, he already had more information than what they were supposed to give, expected to give rather. So this was how Chhatrapati Shivaji had the same strategy of getting information. This is how Shivaji administration, agriculture. Of course, I have time constraint. I do not really want to bore you because it's already, we started it, it's almost 1 hour. So I would suggest there is a book called Shivaji from Swaraj to Suraj. It is written in English, and it was written by Mr. Anil Madhav Dave, who was Union Minister of Environment in the NDA 1.0, that is Modi's first term, and he passed away due to cardiac arrest. He wrote this book in English, in Hindi, as well as Swaraj Se Suraj Tak is the English version. This is the Telugu translation that I am holding in my hands, and I have translated the Telugu version. I believe even a Kannada translation is available, because Dattatreya Hosabaleji was talking about the copyrights and all those things, and he wanted these photographic blocks from me, so we sent all those things. So even Kannada edition must be there if you only search for this. Gives a very detailed account. It's a 238 page account of Shivaji's administration, not the campaigns that he fought, not the wars he fought, the 5 years of effective rule that Shivaji did. So what is the uniqueness of Shivaji's administration system? He created a system that functions without a proper head. That is the most important thing. Chhatrapati Shivaji was in the imprisonment of Aurangzeb for months. When he was under imprisonment, nothing changed here. The administration was as tight as it could be. No laxity was there in the Swarajya. So this, even in the absence of the top leader, the administration was functioning properly. This is something even today's administrators cannot guarantee. The moment the collector comes late to the office, all the employees come late. We have a very young collector from Karnataka working here, and she has gone to the office at 10 a.m. and she saw that there is no employee sitting in his chair. She served notices to them. She did this 3 times, 4 times. She conducted surprise inspections, and then now people are coming on time. Shivaji managed to have a system in place even when he was not there. The second important thing that we need to understand about Shivaji's administration is Shivaji was away for 2 years on South India campaign. He came to the Nizams. The area where I live was under Nizam's rule. He came to Nizam. He had held discussions with Nizam. Then he went to Srishailam, where he offered prayers for quite some time. He interacted with the Chenchu tribes, and then he went to Tamil Nadu. And then from Tamil Nadu, he comes to the Karnataka area. Then he makes friendships there. And then he keeps some of his relatives in a place called Tanjavur. Tanjavur had a flourishing Maratha kingdom. Sharabhoji, Shambhoji. Tanjavur had a Maratha lineage over there. Even now, the kings are of the Maratha descent. So then he comes back. It takes 2 years for him to complete this campaign, South India campaign. For 2 years, the king was away. His ministers were away. His army was away. Yet, nothing changed. The administration was as tight as it could be in the Maharashtra. The third genius was his foresight. For example, How many of us know that Shivaji had a second kingdom? We all know Shivaji's kingdom is in Raipur. I think Raigad. Raigad, yes, Raigad. But Shivaji had a second capital. Where was this capital? It was in Tamil Nadu. Shivaji's kingdom was essentially in the Sahyadri mountain range of Maharashtra. But his second kingdom, second capital was in a place called Jinji, a coastal town in Tamil Nadu. He constructed a fort and he established a capital there. And this capital was never used during his lifetime. After Shivaji was gone, when Aurangzeb invaded Raigad, pillaged the whole area, the Maratha soldiers were, they ran helter-skelter. Then Shivaji's son Shambhaji waged a battle, he was killed. His brother Rajaram operated from Jinji and fought the Mughals. Look at the far-sightedness of this king who ruled only for 5 years. He had a great sense of military, he had a great sense of everything. The point that I'm trying to make is, why should we study Shivaji? This administration apart, he was one king who lived long after he was gone. After Shivaji, the Maratha kingdom was under occupation by Aurangzeb. But did Marathas give up? The idea for which Shivaji died. Shivaji never said that this is my Rajya. Shivaji never said that this is my command. The word he used was, this is Shrinchi Ichha. Shri is God. This is the will of the God, he used to say. Killing of Afzal Khan is the will of God. Setting up of kingdom in Raigad, headquarters in Raigad, this is Lord's will, the Almighty's will. So he never used to say that this is my order. Everything was Shrinchi Ichha. When you give a higher ideal, higher purpose for your armies, for your subordinates, for your people, they tend to work for that ideal. Individual does not matter. Sangathan becomes very important. The idea of Swadharma and Swarashtra were important. Swarajya was important for him. So what Shivaji did was, after Shivaji died in 1680, Mughals ransacked his kingdom. Shambhaji was arrested. Shambhaji was killed in the most gruesome manner possible. But he did not convert to Islam. And then he fought on till the last. And after he was killed, his brother Rajaram fought a war for many years. And he fought from Jinji, as I said. And he was helped by the Kannada kings. He was helped by the one Kannada queen also, who gives him refuge and who refuses entry to the Mughal forces and fights them. I think her name is Chennamma, Kittur Rani Chennamma or Keladi Rani Chennamma, one of these two. And then after Rajaram was gone, his wife Tarabai fights for nearly 8 years. And all this while, they were not in their kingdom. They did not have a Rajya. They did not have finances. Yet their armies fought. And after Tarabai, Raigad was recaptured. After Raigad was recaptured, gradually the Maratha strength grew from strength to strength. And a period came when Marathas were practically ruling the whole country. It is a fallacy to say that the Britishers have taken over India from the Mughals. It is wrong to say that, because they have never fought Mughals all their life. Mughals never fought the Britishers at any point in time. There were 4 or 5 forces that fought the Britishers in India. One was Punjabis. They had Anglo-Sikh wars, 4 Anglo-Sikh wars, and then they took over Punjab. There were 4 Anglo-Mysore wars. So they fought the Mysore Rajas and Mysore kings and the rulers here, and then they took over. They fought 4 Anglo-Maratha wars. They defeated the Marathas completely. Marathas were then ruling from Attock to Cuttack. Cuttack is in Orissa, Attock is in today's Afghanistan. Ahmad Shah Abdali's nephew had come, stood before the Bhagwat Dhwaj and then saluted. Ahmad Shah Abdali was the one who defeated the Maratha armies in the 3rd Panipat battle. His nephew comes and pays obeisance to the Bhagwat Dhwaj in Attock. And same way, they decided who will become the king in Mughal court. They killed Farooq Siyar and then they installed some other people. So at will, they decided who will be the Mughal king. So this is the kind of, they went up to Bengal, they went up to Odisha, they went up to all places, and Gujarat, Rajasthan, of course, was one place where they did not have, I think at the later stages, they entered into Rajasthan. So that way, India was then being ruled by the Marathas when the Britishers came. It was from the Marathas that the Britishers took away India. This is a fact of history that has been obscured, that is not being told. So they completely dismantled the infrastructure that the Peshwas built. They ruined all those things. They destroyed the forts, and the seat of the Peshwa authority was converted into a fish market, so that people don't remember the contribution of the Peshwas and the power that the Peshwas had in those days. So for 200 years after Shivaji, the Marathas held India together. They established Hindu Padapatshahi everywhere. So this is Shivaji's greatest contribution. Someone who rules for 5 or 6 years will be forgotten soon after he passes away or he relinquishes his throne. But when someone gives an idea to the country, a philosophy to work for, an ideology to fight for, that will stay with us for generations. That is the reason why the Maratha kingdom of the descendants of Chhatrapati Shivaji was responsible for the national spirit in this country. And it was because of this national spirit that a Maratha king in Tanjavur protected Tyagaraya Kirtanas of Telugu and has the biggest library of Telugu Sahityam in Saraswati Mahal, Tanjavur. It was this spirit of oneness of this country that made Telugus go over there and become part of the Maratha Empire. The Chenchus from Srisailam, they went and they became soldiers in Shivaji's army. Madhya Pradesh's Bundelkhand Chhatrasal comes and becomes part of Shivaji's grandiose plans for India's independence. If you read the history of this country, you would find that Chhatrapati Shivaji's spiritual guru Samartha Ramdas goes to Punjab, meets Guru Hargobind, who is the 8th guru of the Sikhs, and holds discussions as to how to protect the Dharma and Desha. This is mentioned in the Granth Sahibs of the Sikh literature. Hargobind and Samartha's meeting, Samartha Ramdas's meeting, is a recorded fact of history. You will be surprised to know that Namdev of Maharashtra has over 100 temples in Punjab and Haryana. Namdev belonged to Maharashtra, but he went all the way and preached Dharma to the people, and Punjabi people, and today Haryana and Punjab were at one point in time, they were one state. The extended Punjab state accepted him as their guru, and temples are constructed. There are over 100 Namdev temples. And just come to think of it, one forgotten chapter of India's history. After Guru Gobind Singh was defeated by the Mughals, he becomes a fugitive. His own people disown him, betray him. So where does he come running to? He comes to Maharashtra. It is here that he passes away. Nanded Sahib is the place where the Guru spent his last days. It was in this place, Nanded, that he meets a person called Madhav Das, a Maharashtrian, and hands over the reins of his fight, the responsibility of his fight, to Madhav Das. He goes to Punjab from all the way from Maharashtra and fights there, defeats the Mughals. His name is Banda. Madhav Das becomes Banda Bahadur or Banda Bairagi, depending on how you want to call him, Banda Bahadur Singh or Banda Bairagi. So this is the kind of national consciousness that Shivaji arose in the minds of the people. I worked in Assam for 12 years. There is a king called Rudra Singha. This Rudra Singha used to call him Shivaji II. Where is Assam? Where is Maharashtra? Koch Raja, who's in today's North Bengal, he used to say that we have to complete the unfinished task of Chhatrapati Shivaji. So Shivaji was taken up by, Shivaji was appropriated by all the people across the country. And it is precisely because of this that when India began its modern fight for independence, Lokamanya Balagangadhar Tilak first started Shivaji Utsavs. Shivaji Utsav was his medium and the mode to bring together nationalist elements. And through this, the first Shivaji Utsav in Bengal was held by whom? Guru Rabindranath Tagore. Vivekananda used to always sing a song about Shivaji. The song was Dava Druma Danda Para Chita Mrugamunda Para Mupana Vitanda Para Jaise Mrugaraja Hai Tejatama Amsa Para Kanhajima Kamsa Para Tya Malecha Upar Shera Shivaraja Hai. Shivaji is like a pouncing tiger on the Mlechas. This poem was written by a Pandit from Uttar Pradesh, Kanpur. His name is Bhushan. Bhushan writes a poem in Hindi. He is a court poet of Shivaji. 400 years after Shivaji was gone, Vivekananda sings this song. Rabindranath Tagore holds Shivaji Utsavs in Bengal. So Shivaji was the guiding light of India's independence movement. It was unfortunate that some people called him misguided patriot. So Shivaji's legacy, understanding Shivaji's strategies, understanding Shivaji's administrative acumen, understanding his overall vision for Swarajya and Swadharma are very important for today's generation, because we have lessons there that can be useful for our present day, Rashtra Karya. Dhanyawad, you have given me a very patient hearing. I have spoken for nearly more than 1 hour, yet you have been very indulgent and patient. Thank you so much. Dhanyawad.
Thank you very much, sir, for this very, very enriching talk. I think I would request you, sir, just to mute yourself for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. So in your speech, you have done a Herculean task of encapsulating various aspects of personality of Shivaji, his vision, his secular philosophy, and so many things. I really thank you very much. And you said you do not want to go to many issues because you don't want to bore us. But let me tell you very frankly, there was not a single moment where we felt bored. And I really wish, had there been more time at our disposal, we could have listened to you more. And I liked one aspect of your speech very much, where you draw contrast of Shivaji with the so-called great or most fancied Western actors like Caesar, Napoleon, and you justifiably showed us why Shivaji truly belongs to the legend or greatness that we all should be aware of and appreciate. So thank you very much, sir. I think now I would request our respected faculty members if they have any question, so that you can answer to their queries. So floor is open now.
Namaskar ji. Yeah, sir, you are mute. So I am very big fan of you. I am Venkatramana from Central University of Karnataka, Chemistry Department. Sir, am I audible?
You are audible. You are very much audible, sir.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I am very much big fan of you, and I am follower of your Raka Lokam YouTube channel. Sir, I was fortunate to visit Kolhapur Shahu Maharaj Museum.
Yes.
So how actually Shahu Maharaj, there every people are very much fan of this Shahu Maharaj. So what is that impact on Shivaji Maharaj by the Shahu Maharaj? I also would like to know that Shahu Maharaj is a ancestor, right, or descendant?
Shahu Maharaj is a descendant of Shivaji. He came much later, actually almost 250 years later. He was in the during the time of independence movement, but he was a great social reformer. He was the first one who actually conceptualized this idea of reservations.
Okay.
He said that the downtrodden sections of the society can be uplifted only when there are some protective guarantees for these people. So Sahu Maharaj had started reservations in his area of influence, because by the time Sahu Maharaj and Sahu Maharaj was ruling, India was under the shackles of British. He had his own small area, principality, where he could actually translate his ideas of equality, equal opportunity, and bring in reservations. You would be surprised to know that another Maratha ruler, the Gaikwads of Baroda. Baroda is actually, it was under the Gaikwads of Baroda are actually Marathas. So the Gaikwads were the people who introduced the concept of mandatory female literacy. So there is a very famous video of Prime Minister Narendra Modi where he says that, he went and he addressed a meeting in Baroda where he asked people to lift their hands, literate people to literate women to raise their hands. He finds that only old women raise their hands. What happened to the young? He asks. Then the old people say that we were educated under the Baroda Maharaja, the Gaikwads. Baroda Maharaja, incidentally, was the one who sponsored the education of Baba Sahib Ambedkar and gave him a job there, one of the topmost jobs in his principality. So the Marathas were social reformers, and Sahu Maharaj is the forerunner of, in many ways, forerunner of India's current social justice methodologies. You would be surprised, even the Mysore Maharajas, they were told by Swami Vivekananda to promote female education. So Mysore Maharaja was one of the first kings who took up female education. Mysore Maharaja and Nizam are close by. Nizams had just one school for women, and that was exclusively for Muslim women, Mahbubia School in Hyderabad, where Muslim aristocracies, females from the aristocracy can study, but Mysore Maharaja made it universal. This, of course, I'm digressing from the point, but Sahu Maharaj is a very great personality, someone whose work needs to be studied. He has encouraged reform. He has supported fighters for social justice, social reform. So Sahu Maharaj was a descendant. Shivaji's father was Shahaji. So Shahaji is different, Sahu Maharaj is different.
Yeah, thank you, sir, and really great to know, sir. So I have another question. I would like to know that this slogan I heard in Kolhapur University, that is Jai Bhavani, Jai Shivaji. So
Yes.
is that any spiritual connection with Shivaji, with Bhavani Mata, that where people are still chanting that slogan, that mantra?
Yes, yes.
So
Jai
that,
Bhavani,
what is that?
Shivaji was a great, devotee of Mother Goddess. So there is a saying that Tulja Bhavani gifted him a sword which he used in the war. There is also a story that Shivaji, there is also an account, rather, I would not call it story, an account that Shivaji was gifted a weapon in Sri Shailam also. Shivaji was, a great devotee of Jagadamba. He used to call Tulja Bhavani Jagadamba. Shivaji was a great. In fact, all the Marathas had, in the last after Shivaji, they had their own icons. For example, if you go to the Indore region of Madhya Pradesh, it was a Holkar Maratha ruled area. The slogan there is Yalkot Jai Malhar. Malhar is one village deity, and that was their slogan. So Shivaji basically was a great devotee of Bhavani Mata, and even before slaying Afzal Khan, he worships Bhavani Mata. So Bhavani was like the presiding deity, the Tulja Bhavani and the Kolhapur Lakshmi and the Pandharpur. These three were the spiritual centers of Maharashtra in those days. They continue to be the centers even now. So Jai Bhavani, Jai Shivaji comes from that period. As you rightly said, if the Kolhapur students are chanting this slogan, and they should be congratulated for carrying forward the same cultural tradition as that of Shivaji.
Yes, sir. We witnessed that actually, during that cultural event after this National University T20 Championship, faculty championship, they did that. So I was very happy, and we met them personally and congratulated them. Thank you very much, sir, for the insightful thoughts.
Thank you.
Sir, Namaste, sir.
Namaste.
Sir, Lakshman here, sir. Yeah, sir, actually, you have explained how Shivaji could able to garner the support of his followers who have never deserted him.
Yes.
And also you compared how Napoleon had problem and Alexander the Great also had problem garnering the support and also continue to have support of his followers. So in this actually Shivaji is different from these people. So I would like to know what made people to rally behind Shivaji and what are the strategies Shivaji Maharaj used to make sure that these people will be stick to their principles. Even in modern days also we see people shift their allegiances. So I wonder, even you said 27 years they fought without having adequate
Yes.
salary also.
Yes.
So, which is, more thrilling as a social science student for me also. And actually, I never came across these stories. But actually, what you said with evidences, I am astonished to listen it. I would like to know what are the strategies. Are there any documents which documented this process strategies, which we can also follow, sir?
Yes. Oh, that's a beautiful question, sir. I must say, Professor Lakshmana, your question is actually very relevant, very wonderful, and it's instructive for all of us sitting over here. The Shivaji's edicts, whatever decrees that he had given, whatever orders he had passed, they have been written down by a minister called Ramachandra Amatya. Ramchandra Amatya has codified 20 decrees of Chhatrapati Shivaji, like how a king should sit. Shivaji had an order on that. For example, he says that king should never put his hand on his head, he should never touch his head, because that sends a negative feeling, as if he's in thought, he's in a worry. So king should never touch his eyes. King should not look down for a longer period of time. He should not look at the ground for a long period of time. He should always be erect. He should never cut jokes with his people, followers, even in the lighter of the moments. So Shivaji has given some 20 edicts. All these 20 edicts have been protected and preserved by Ramachandra Amatya, and they are available in Marathi language. And Shivaji's actions have been documented by Kavi Bhushan. Kavi Bhushan has actually written down Shivaji's, how the war strategies and then all these things. For example, there is a beautiful poem. Actually, we can teach our children, make them memorize this, how Shivaji's army moves. Kavi Bhushan, he writes a poem which says, I'm just reciting out of interest. साजे चतु रंग सेना रंग में उमंग धरी सरजा शिवाजी जंग जीतन चलत है भूषण बनत नद विहग नगाड़न से नदी नद मद गए रन में रलत है ऐल फैल खैल बैल खलक में गैल गैल गजन के ठैल पैल सैल उसलत है तारा तो तरणी धूली धारा में लगत जिमी धारा पर पारा पारा वारियों हलत है. He describes the movement of Shivaji's army, this poet from Kanpur that I was speaking about. So that's one part. Secondly, Shivaji's life was very exemplary. Why people were ready to die for Shivaji? His life was exemplary. He never craved for luxuries. Whenever he used to camp in forests or in battlefields, there used to be only two tents, one small tent, one big tent. The big tent was for all the army chiefs, generals that he had, the Subedar, Sardar, so on and so forth. The smaller tent was for Chhatrapati Shivaji. He never craved for personal luxuries. And he never felt that he was the leader. As I said, he used to say that everything is Shrinchi Icha. He never called it our kingdom. He always called it Swarajya. He lived it. And there were at least 4 or 5 occasions when he was ready to give up his kingdom. In one incident, he sits and listens to Tukaram's abhangs. After listening to Tukaram's abhangs, he says that I don't want this kingdom, nothing. I don't want anything. I just want to live with you and listen to the abhangs all my life. Then Tukaram himself tells him to take up weapons and fight. So there are at least 4 such occasions that we know of. Sri Shailam, he was so overcome by spiritualism that he wanted to offer his head to the mother goddess. But finally mother herself appears, as the story goes, and asks him to continue his fight. So Shivaji never craved for power. The Pattabhishek of Chhatrapati Shivaji, Aindrabhishek as they call, was a demand that came from the people. Shivaji never wanted it. So his life was exemplary, and whenever there was a war, he would put his life before everyone else. One great quality of Indian Army generals is that Indian Army officers, majors, colonels, lieutenant colonels, they die first. Their Jawans die later. So this Shivaji had this tradition. Shivaji put his life in danger. When he was to attack Shaista Khan, the team was led by Shivaji. As a Raja, he could sit in his chambers and he could have said, you go and do this and come back. Shivaji led the attack. This is something that we need to understand. So I think it is a leader is worshipped, a leader is adored, a leader is followed only when he lives an exemplary life. Today, we have our faith in Prime Minister Narendra Modi because we know that he is different from rest of the pack. This man doesn't have a family. This man doesn't have a pecuniary financial interest. This man only has the welfare of the country at hand. When he attacks Pulwama, the nation believes him. Even if some people say that this Pulwama whole thing is a sham and never happened, the nation believed him because they know this man. When your life is exemplary, there are students who die for the teachers because they see that teachers live by what they preach. So Shivaji was one man, who practiced what he preached, and a lot of management studies, as you have rightly pointed out, management studies have been done on Shivaji. All across Maharashtra, there are a lot of videos about management principles in Shivaji's life, which we can actually relate to our students. Thanks for asking this question, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for such a wonderful explanation, sir.
Namaskar ji, I have one question. That question is out of my curiosity because there is a complete correlation between Kautilya's Arthashastra and Shivaji's strategies.
Yes.
Because whatever Kautilya Arthashastra said in statecraft,
Yes.
and Shivaji's Ashtapradhan governance model is almost similar in all parameters. So it was the Kautilya's Arthashastra was held much before to Shivaji's birth, almost 1500, 1600 years before. So even though Shivaji adopted same kind of model, and after Shivaji's, we do not have such kind of model in the modern India. So what is lacuna, and what was the practices which were which had been practiced from over the period of time from Kautilya's to Shivaji, and why not from Shivaji to modern?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question because if you actually study Shivaji's governance model, you would find that not just Ashtapradhan, he had a concept of Rajamandala. The Rajamandala concept that Kautilya speaks about, the Rajamandala was implemented by Chhatrapati Shivaji, where he had Vijigishus, he had Mitras, he had Tatasthas, and all these. He had some kingdoms which were Tatastha, which were neutral rather, and then some who were inimical to him, the Adil Shahis and Bijapurs. And he used all those Kuta Vidya to actually, divide the enemies. One interesting thing that we must understand is Shivaji perhaps is the only king in India who fought 8 enemies at the same time. He fought 8 enemies: Mughals, Nizam, Mughals, I'm sorry, there was a call, so there's slight disruption. Nizams, Mughals, Adil Shahis, Then he had Siddhis, Abyssinians, the Ethiopian people. Then he fought the British, French, Portuguese, and the Dutch. In the same span of 40 years, he fought all these enemies. He was friendly with them at some stage. He used them and he helped them. At the same time, he used them up against, he played one against the other. So this is a typical Kautilian policy that Shivaji adopted. The spy system that he had developed in the friendly as well as enemy countries, in the countries that are in the kingdoms that are far away. This is all Kautilian in their outlook, as you have very rightly pointed out. Unfortunately for us, after Shivaji, this system was practiced by the Bajiraos and the Peshwas. For 200 years, the Peshwas used the intelligence setup, then all these systems. But then after the Anglo-Marathan War, this knowledge system was lost, completely lost. As we have seen before Shivaji, I gave the example of Devgiri. He did not know that the enemy was just 23 kilometers away from him, and he was sitting coolly thinking that there will be no attack from North India. So that's a very that's very typical of Shivaji. Shivaji had this idea, perhaps, of the perhaps this was passed on to him by his Amatyas or by Samartha Ramdas. We do not know, because as you said, this is a very interesting thing. After Shivaji, for some time, it was practiced by the Marathas. But then the knowledge was lost. And you know how the Kautilian Ardhashastra was rediscovered. It was rediscovered in a library in Karnataka. Then the people started reading it, and then it was only a vague memory in the minds of the people till the manuscript was recovered from Karnataka. So somewhere along we lost this knowledge. So now the country is actually looking at Kautilian principles and their idea of warfare, their idea of diplomacy. Here was one case who talked about international diplomacy. He talked about doots, the ambassadors, emissaries. So I think somewhere along we lost this knowledge. I think this this knowledge perhaps was limited to some scholars, Brahmin scholars who were in some they kept all these books with them, and they never got transmitted to the next generations. For instance, I know of this Shastra called Bows and Arrows. There was a Talapatra Grantha in the possession of a tribal who was illiterate. When the government of India was actually surveying the manuscripts, it found that one tribal, very backward area, no access to anything, he was in the possession of a book that talked about archery. I don't remember the name of the Talapatra Grantha. He kept it very safely. He was performing pujas to it, but he's an unlettered man. He says this has been in our family for years. So a knowledge system was there among the tribals, but it was lost. Even though he had the manuscript in his hands, he was unable to decipher it. So perhaps I think the 300 or 400 years of history, particularly the Aurangzeb period and the and the period of the British advent and then the European advent into India, I think we have lost a lot of systems. They remain hidden in some families, and perhaps this could be one reason. But I think, as you said, we need more research. We need to study more. And how come there is a manuscript of Kautilya who operated near Takshashila? His manuscript is present in a library in Bangalore. So I think these are subjects of research that we need to do.
Okay, Mallikarjun sir, I think this would be the last question because we are running short of time. So, sir, you may please go ahead with your question.
When we came to any our ancient kingdom, when it comes to the what we can call to the classification of land, tax, everything was very good. Including
slightly louder, sir. Louder, sir.
You are not clear enough, Mallikarjun sir. Can you speak loudly?
Yes, sure. Now I'm audible, sir.
Yeah, fine, sir, fine.
Okay. Sir, when we see to our ancient kingdoms, our kings, including the Shivaji, they have classified very good, including the land, classification, and taxes, everything. Then come to these things in the modernization days, at present days. In the name of the modernization, name of the industrialization, they are giving to qualitative land to the industry. How we can linkage this, and can we say where the governance has been failed?
Yeah, so that's actually a very good question, sir, because firstly, we never had any land disputes during the period of our kings. Shivaji had levied Chauth and Sardeshmukh, and then Shivaji had records of every inch of land. Not just Shivaji, even Nizam. We were under Nizam's rule in Hyderabad. Nizam's rule had something called Chauda Khata Bahi. So every village head was to fill information on a weekly basis under 14 heads. Some of the information would be very interesting. How much rain, had fallen during this particular period? What were the areas that were inundated? How many crops got adequate rain? Not just that. What are the crops that are being, sown? At what stage is the crop? Not just that. Marriage. Were there any marriages during this last 1 week? In which house? Where did the relatives come from? Did they come from Bombay? Did they come from Maharashtra? Did they come from Karnataka? This Chauda Khata Bahi system was so efficient. Nizam never moved out of Hyderabad, but he used to get all the information about every village, land records, everything. Unfortunately, today, 70 years after independence, our land records are not right. First problem, our land records are not accurate. There are disputes. Even the computerizations that our government, state governments and central governments are talking about, they are faulty. There are a lot of problems. But more than that, usage of land usage patterns that you have pointed out is a problem area. Fertile lands are being given away for SIDS when there are other lands that can be given. I know of a particular sedge in Mahbub Nagar district of Andhra Pradesh, where fertile land, where 3 crops could be sown, has been given away. Today, Andhra Pradesh's capital, one of the 3 capitals that the present government is talking about, the Amaravati, was constructed on lands that are fertile, that had 3 crops an year, and we have constructed capitals. In the older days, they had an idea about land usage, where the lands have to be cultivated, where the, how to leave out the lands under cultivation and then construct things. Dams were constructed. For instance, the famous Kaveri Anicut that was constructed by the kings there. The agricultural lands were not touched. Only the non-agricultural lands and the riverbed areas have been taken over. So that kind of system somewhere along, our bureaucracy today doesn't look at agriculture as a viable option because its contribution to GDP is very low. They think that agriculture can be done away with. Fertile lands are being given for sets. Fertile lands are being used to construct buildings. Fertile lands are being, used for setting up railway systems. This is something I think the governments of the day have to be sensitive. It is interesting to note that the kings of yesteryears were conscious and conscientious about these lands, but unfortunately our rulers somehow are not conscious about this. I'll tell you one more interesting incident. We have a huge project coming up in Andhra Pradesh. It is called Polavaram project. In Polavaram project, if a forest land is lost, even an inch of forest land is lost, a land for land has to be given. So one government department gets land from the other government department. And the total cost of the forest produce in the area that is being taken over has to be given. To whom? To this same department, one department in the government from the other department. The third thing is the cost of reforestation has to be given by one department to the other department. What about the tribals living there? The tribal people living there, will be given 75,000 on humanitarian basis from the ITDA funds, not from the R&R of the relief and rehabilitation amounts of the project that have been earmarked for the projects. So somewhere along, I think we have to go back to our Bharatiya roots and start viewing land as mother, and to identify land parcels that are exclusively meant for agriculture and do not tinker with them. And this becomes very important. As you rightly said, this consciousness, this feeling of treating soil as mother, land as mother, is now missing in the governments, and it is because of this that for them agricultural land or any land is one and the same, and they don't mind troubling innocent farmers whose livelihood depends on these lands. I think this is one point that I spoke about Shivaji's rehabilitation policy. I think these governments that we have today should take a leap out of Shivaji's rule and then start treating land as sacred.
Sir, thank you very much for taking up these questions patiently, and my sincere apologies to other colleagues because we are unable to take up further question due to paucity of time. Perhaps Sudhakar Rao sir, in the chat box you can provide your mail ID so that if any faculty member has any further question, they may contact you directly. Yes. So now we are winding up the program. I would request our beloved colleague Dr. Shrang Mesh to present vote of thanks now.
Thank you, Mr. Sir. I thank today's speaker, Sri Raka Sudhakar Rao ji, who has explained about Swaraj, about Shivaji model of Swaraj.